Today we're going to talk about the Battle of the Atlantic, or the Battle in the Atlantic during World War II, which was really the battle for the Americans to get supplies to Great Britain and France to help aid them in World War II. So our goal is to explain how the Allies used the convoy system to win the Battle of the Atlantic. We know that in 1935, America declared neutrality. We said, we're not getting involved in the war. We're not going to help anybody. And then we quickly broke that policy in 1939 when we came up with the cash and carry policy. We would only give money to our allies, France and Great Britain, but only if they paid for it and they took it away themselves. So during that cash and carry policy, during that time period, we gave them over 500,000 rifles, over 80,000 machine guns, and over 50 destroyers. So, hey, you can have our old warships if you want, no big deal. So, hardly neutral. Then, of course, in March of 1941, even before Pearl Harbor, we adopt the Lend-Lease Act, where the United States says we will lend or lease anything to nations that are vital to U.S. security. Of course, anybody that was vital to U.S. security happened to be France and Great Britain, putting us in this position where, once again, we're no longer neutral. So in April of 1942, and even prior to that, we start shipping stuff from the United States. So in April of 1942, we start shipping stuff from the United States across the Atlantic Ocean to France and Great Britain. Now, this may not seem like a big deal, but of course the Germans know we're doing this. And so the Germans tend to use submarines, or U-boats if they will, to counter the Battle of the Atlantic. So to take out our merchant ships that are bringing supplies, they will use over 1,162 U-boats to try to sink as much of these merchant ships as they possibly can. And so we see carnage that looks a little bit like this, or like this. So we see a torpedo, we see a German U-boat which hits a merchant ship, absolutely destroying it. We can see tons of carnage as a result of the Battle of the Atlantic. So, pretty intense time period. Not only that, but the Germans would also use airplanes to try to sink merchant ships. They would drop bombs and torpedoes, so pretty effective style of warfare, especially because of submarines, but also because of the planes. The Germans early on were winning the Battle of the Atlantic. If we look at the amount of ships that were sunk by various causes and specifically sunk by submarines, from 1939 to 41 and really into 42, the Germans have a huge amount of success in the Battle of the Atlantic. Of course, the U.S. is not going to let this happen. The British aren't going to let this happen, so we develop a response to it. We come up with what is known as the convoy system. And what you see in the picture below is a perfect example of the convoy system. You see ships kind of sailing together. So instead of sending one or two merchant ships on their own, we send a bunch of merchant ships and surround them with what we call escort ships, destroyers and frigates and other large, what you would call battleships, really that are just different types of warships. Now, in order to counter those, the Germans come up with what are known as depth charges, and we use them too. A depth charge is what you see in the picture. It essentially looks like a giant barrel, except that giant barrel is filled with explosives. And so it will sink, and then when the Germans or the Allies run it over, it goes kaboom, and it blows them to kingdom come. The Germans, of course, wanted to counter our counter of their attack, and so instead of traveling in convoys, they traveled in their own version of a convoy, what is known as a wolf pack. And so a wolf pack is 40 or more U-boats sometimes at a time that would travel together and try to sink Allied ships. And of course, this ended up being pretty successful too. They were sinking on average about 350,000 tons of American shipments per month. Of course, we have to counter this with even more advanced technology. We come up with things like radar. Radar is still pretty primitive at the time, but that will certainly help us. Sonar, the underwater version of radar, will also help us to detect German submarines, German U-boats. And so by detecting the sound waves, we're able to know where German submarines are. And then the Lee light, which is mounted to planes, will help us to see many of the German attacks at night. This is what the overall battle might look like if we were to look at the convoy system versus a wolf pack. And so we start out by seeing the merchant ships traveling in convoy. We see them traveling together. We see around them we've got the escort ships to try to keep them to safety. And then, of course, we see the German defenses. We see the Air Force as well as the submarines and ships that travel as part of the wolf pack. And of course, we've got sonar going on. This is really a good illustration of what actually happened. Of course, the secret to defeating all of this is figuring out the Enigma. The Enigma is the German secret code machine. It's a way that they're able to let their ships know where they need to be and when they need to be there in order for the wolf pack to be successful. Now, the Enigma actually comes about long before the Germans start using it. It is a secret decoding machine. You've got a keyboard, you've got a plug board, you've got rotors, you've got lamps, and this is essentially how it works.
A light will light. I press the same key again, a different light. Each time I press the key, that rotor moves in position, making a different path through these. In fact, the path goes from the key through the plug board, up through the three rotors, reflects back through the three rotors, back through the plug board, and then it lights a light. So, somewhere in the 26 positions on the first rotor, the second one will get pushed forward one. At that point is selectable before you put that rotor in. Somewhere in its 26, this one gets pushed forward. That means it takes 26 to the third power of characters before this repeats itself. 17,576 characters. That's pretty complicated. Not only that, with this machine, later on, the Germans issued a box of 5 rotors, and they had a schedule for each day of the month, which 3 of the 5 rotors to put in which order, which starting point to use, which rollover point to use, and which patching to put up here in front. And they would change that every morning. And with all of those complications, they were certain that nobody would ever figure this out. But we know that's not true. In fact, these 3 gentlemen were in the Polish Cipher Bureau in the early 30s, and they had gotten a hold of a machine and were able to express in mathematical equation form how it worked. If they knew which rotors were in the machine, mathematically they could decrypt it.
So the Enigma machine actually was created for banks at first. They needed a way to decode secret information, but then that eventually was cracked by the Polish Cipher Bureau. Yes, my people did something in 1932. But so then the Germans made the Enigma even stronger. And so the Nazi Enigma was a more complex version of the original Enigma machine. Now, maybe you've heard of the movie U-571. If you have, or if you haven't, we're going to watch a little bit of it in class. And the movie U-571 and the story of the Enigma is sort of true. So it does turn out in May of 1941 that the Allied forces did capture a German Enigma machine. The difference is there was no such boat as U-571. The actual name of the boat was U-110. That was the German submarine that we were going after. And it wasn't captured by an American ship as the movie makes it out to be. It's actually a British ship that captures the U-571 or the U-110. Now, even once we know about this, we don't want to let the Germans know that we have it, because if he knew that we had their secret code machine and that we cracked it, they would go crack all their codes. Eventually, Hitler does find out that we know what the code is, and he really just is in kind of denial and doesn't believe it and continues to use the secret code, and well, that ends up costing him in the Battle of the Atlantic. So by the time we get the Enigma, by the time we get this secret machine, we will absolutely destroy the Germans. So you can see the number of ships goes down significantly once that decoding has taken place. The Battle of the Atlantic is still pretty costly. Over 2,600 Allied ships will be sunk, over 60,000 sailors lost. On the German side, 785 U-boats sunk, 5,000 prisoners of war, and 28,000 killed.
to close the deadly mid-Atlantic gap. From space, the boneyard of Allied shipping is startlingly revealed.
You can fly missions from the United States, you can fly missions from Britain, but you can't quite close everything, and you've got the mid-Atlantic gap in the middle. The U-boats realize that and concentrate in that area.
By April 1943, 3,450 Allied ships have been lost. But new carriers are launched, loaded with long-range aircraft fitted with the magnetron number 12, and the gap begins to close.
It turns the Atlantic from this wide mass in which the U-boat can hide in to no, I can find you out there.
As British code breakers crack the German Enigma code, the final piece of the Allied resurgence falls into place, and the tactical and technological advantage is exploited in the convoy battle known as ONS-5.
Among all the convoy battles, one of the most important was ONS-5 in April 43, and it's important really because it demonstrated clearly, I think, how far the Allies had gone.
42 ships of the slow-bound ONS-5 convoy leave Liverpool for Canada. For Dönitz, it is a perfect target.
Dönitz is feeling this great sense of urgency, like he needs to sink more and more tons of shipping, and he actually presses his luck in this battle.
The first wave of U-boats sink 13 Allied ships. But as thick fog falls, the advantage switches. Armed with the German codes and advanced radar, the Allies strike back with impunity.
Dönitz fights longer than he should, brings in more U-boats than he should, which are then in fact chewed up by the convoy. After the battle, Dönitz says the Battle of the Atlantic is over, because he sees how expert the British and Americans have become at detecting U-boats, chasing them down and killing them.
With ONS-5, the Battle of the Atlantic is all but won. And the astonishing transformation of American industry can start to dictate the fortunes of war.
So there you have it. Hope you enjoyed that video clip. Now, if we're in class, we're going to watch a few clips from the movie U-571. Again, not really historically accurate. The story of getting the Enigma is it just wasn't an American ship, and the German ship wasn't the U-571. It was actually the British in the U-110. So we'll watch that in class. And with that, I bring this lesson to an end. Have a wonderful day, and it was a pleasure working with you again.